summer of 1991. During his tenure in Israel's diplomatic corps, Ido Aharoni held 2 overseas positions in Los Angeles and New York. In September 2007, he was appointed to serve as head of Israel's brand management team in Jerusalem. In the spring of 2006, he was appointed to serve as senior advisor to Israel's foreign minister and vice prime minister in charge of media and public affairs. Before joining the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he earned a bachelor's degree at Tel Aviv University with a joint film major in film and television, sociology, and anthropology. He then moved to the United States, where he obtained a master's degree in mass communication from Emerson College in Boston. He has had an active career in news production and produced several independent videos in Israel and the United States. He and I met in February of this year at the Lawyers for Israel luncheon, and I had expressed to him that my daughter Molly was on her way to Tel Aviv University, and we maintained a correspondence since then. In June, I extended the invitation to Ambassador Aharoni to come here and speak to us today on a tremendous topic of what's happening in the world press with regard to delegitimization of Israel. So it's a very timely topic. I'm thrilled that he has accepted the invitation and that he's here with us this morning. And I'm quite proud and very honored to introduce to you Ambassador Ido Aharoni.
Thank you so much, Doug, for this. I don't know what you thought about this introduction. I thought it was brilliant. I'm very pleased, that Doug and Barak are sponsoring this breakfast. I want Barak to know I arrived here very late in the middle of the night. As I was driving into this hotel, I heard your radio commercial. So at least one person in the room heard it. I'm very, very happy to be here among friends and family, literally. I think half of the people in the room are either my family or my friends. But it's a real pleasure. It's a real pleasure to be here. On my way in, someone asked me, how do you, with the Iranian nuclear threat and with the Hamas and Hezbollah and with the Arab Spring, how do you even get to sleep at night? And I told him the truth. I sleep like a baby. I wake up every 20 minutes crying. But on a more serious note, because we're here to discuss a very serious topic, before I begin, I know that there's an issue on your mind, and there's a great deal of misunderstanding and confusion on what exactly happened in the United Nations last week. So let me, with your permission, take 2 minutes of your time, although it's not entirely unrelated, but I'd like to talk about that. A lot of people think that what happened in the United Nations is actually that the Palestinians won statehood. You have to know one very basic fact. The United Nations has no authority, according to the international law, to grant statehood. The only thing the United Nations can do and authorized to do is to grant membership in the United Nations. There are 193 countries in the United Nations. If a nation would like to be recognized internationally, what they have to do is proclaim independence, like Israel did in May of 1948, and then bilaterally approach each and every country and ask for their recognition. President Truman received a memo that Ben-Gurion proclaimed independence and signed that memo with some amends after 11 minutes. In fact, I have a copy of that memo on my wall in my office. Now, there are 193 members in the United Nations. The Palestinians made a move exactly a year ago to try and become a full member in the United Nations. They were threatened and warned by the international community headed by the US administration not to do so. Why? Because the United States has the veto power in the Security Council, which is the only way for an entity to become a member of the United Nations. So when that bid fell, when the United Nations was able to form a 9-member bloc in the Security Council of 15 members, they went for Plan B. What's Plan B? Plan B, which is what they did 2 weeks ago, is a rather symbolic upgrade of their existing status within the UN from observer to non-member state. It really doesn't change their status as a people, doesn't change anything on the ground, obviously, doesn't grant statehood. No, so the question is, if this is largely symbolic, then why were you against it? And there are two answers to this question. The first is, the very DNA of Israeli-Palestinian negotiations over the years were based on the notion of direct negotiations. Every inch of progress that was achieved between Israelis and Palestinians was achieved through direct negotiations for the last 19 years. In fact, the Declaration of Principles, that famous document that was signed September 13th, 1993, in the White House, talks about that principle as a golden rule. Even in Oslo with the Norwegians, I want you to know, as someone who was there, the Norwegians were never in the room. They were always outside. They were the facilitators. They tried to ease the tension, but the negotiations were always direct. The road to peace goes through Jerusalem, doesn't go through New York. In fact, Prime Minister Netanyahu issued a statement in which he said, the distance between Jerusalem and Ramallah is only 12 miles. There's no need to go to New York. You can come to Jerusalem and start the negotiations. And the second reason, and obviously I'm not going into the whole question of the reluctance, the ongoing habitual reluctance of the Palestinians to negotiate directly with us. They figured it out. It's easier for them to have the international community exert pressure on Israel. They think, obviously they're wrong, that Israel will cave in and they'll be able to get more out of this. The second reason, which I think is more practical or more realistic. See, for the average villager in the West Bank, they read in the newspaper that they were just granted statehood. Their expectation is very high, that something very dramatic would happen the next day. They are waiting to see a real change in their living conditions. And obviously that change won't come because this was largely symbolic. Now we all know what happens. We've seen it before. When a great deal of euphoria leads to disappointment. And the disappointment can, God forbid, lead to an eruption of a third intifada. So when Secretary of State last year, Hillary Clinton, said to the countries who supported the UN bid, she told them something very powerful. She said, you vote for it, you own it. What did she mean by that? She meant that those countries who voted for that reckless, irresponsible public relations maneuver in the United Nations, if, God forbid, violence erupts, they're responsible for it. That's what she meant. And this is the real danger, because we've seen it before. When the Palestinians are disappointed, when they're disillusioned, that disillusionment leads sometimes to another round of violence that could claim the lives of hundreds, if not thousands. So this is really the reason why we're against it, although we all recognize that this is really a public relations maneuver that doesn't really produce real results on the ground. So this is my word to you on the Palestinian issue. Now, you know, for many years, we worked under the assumption that the threats that we're facing are tangible, physical, and for the most part, external. Now there's a new threat that was added to it about 10, 15 years ago. This threat is not necessarily tangible. It's not necessarily external. This threat is more conceptual. What is the threat? It's a new emerging narrative, and I will say in a few minutes why this narrative is on the rise these days. There are many sociological and political reasons for it. There's a new narrative out there that says the following: Israel is a remnant of European colonialism. Just as Europe was ending its colonial chapter in the mid-60s, Israel started its by taking over the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And Israel is not a legitimate entity. It is not an asset to the international community, but rather than a burden. This is the narrative. We call it the narrative of delegitimization. And the people that carry that narrative also developed a system, a method. How do you turn this strategy into real action on the ground? They came up with a bundle of actions, action items. They're boycotting Israeli products. They're boycotting Israeli musicians that come over here, Israeli artists. They're boycotting American performers that go to Israel. Even here I heard the FIDF dinner, there was an incident with Stevie Wonder. They are calling for sanctions against Israel in international forums, and they're calling to divest from Israel. And they're targeting people like yourselves, people who have a stake in Israel, people who are part of the group that we call the shareholders of Israel, people that carry Israel in their hearts. And we tried to study very scientifically the reasons as to why this narrative is on the rise. And I'd like to share with you some of the findings that we learned, and then maybe propose a strategy for all of you to consider, and also say a few words about how JNF is playing a very important role combating the narrative of delegitimization. We ran a study in the United States. This was about a year and a half ago. It was a joint study of the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations, together with the Brand Israel Group, which is a group of marketing experts that was established in New York some 12 years ago. It was the most comprehensive, deep study ever conducted in the United States. It was conducted by 2 different research outfits, the top of the line, really, top of the line research. And as it stands out, we have about, if we're looking at Israel's support base, we have about 22% of the American people that are with us, Jews and non-Jews. Obviously, most of them are not Jewish. Who are they? These are people that, as I said before, the definition is that they carry Israel in their heart, they care about us, they're curious about us, they follow the news about us, they come to visit us, they would consider investing money in Israel, if the right opportunity comes. They're with us no matter what, through thick and thin, when we make peace, when we go to war. The other end of the spectrum, there's a smaller group of 8%. We call them the unreachables. Who are the unreachables? People that no matter what you do or say, you will always be on the wrong side of their narrative. Even when Israel was making peace with the Palestinians in the early 90s, it wasn't good enough for them. These are the Noam Chomskys of the world, the Noam Finkelsteins of the world, okay? 8%, many of them are members of the progressive elite, and yes, many of them are members of the tribe. But here's the thing. In the middle, you have 70% of the American population. 70% of the American population that we define as the population at risk. What is the risk? The risk is not that they will move over to the 8%. They won't. They're not accepting the narrative of the other side, and they're not accepting the narrative of delegitimization. The risk is that they will alienate themselves from the 22%. Why? Because our study discovered, much to our amazement, that the same messages, the same arguments that work beautifully with the 22%, that are music to the ears of the 22%, actually not only that they do not work with the 70%, they actually alienate them. And these people develop what we call the inability to relate to Israel. Not because they don't like Israel, not because they support the other side, simply because they know nothing about who we are. Now, over the years, we worked under a very basic, school of thought or assumption. We had a very clear understanding of what we need to do. We felt that our job as a community is to win an imaginary debate by using legal, historical arguments. Our research shows it doesn't work. You know, it reminds me of the story about this guy whose entire life, he was born on August 8th. So he decided that the number 8 is the number that will guide him in his life. So everything he did in his life had something to do with 8. You know, when he married his wife, it was on August 8th. He wanted to have 8 children. They rented an apartment on 8th Avenue, 888, 8th Avenue, 8th floor, apartment 8. Everything he did was 8. One day, this guy goes to the races. And he looks at the board and he sees, to his surprise, that in lane number 8, there's a horse competing by the name of numero 8. He says to himself, this is my lucky day. So he's waiting patiently until it's 8 minutes to 8. And then he goes to ticket window number 8, and he bets his entire life savings, $888,000 on numero 8. And sure enough, the horse finished 8th. That's what happens when you don't have the ability to adjust. For many years, we worked under that assumption. We now know it's not working. What does work? We went out, tried to understand what will make the world look at Israel outside the context of conflict. When you say Israel to people all over the world, the first thing that comes to mind is conflict. It's not that they don't support Israel. It's not that they don't like Israel. It's just that Israel is associated in our minds, friends and people who are not our friends, in the context of conflict. This is detrimental to Israel's ability to attract tourism, for example. It's detrimental to Israel's ability to attract investors. It's detrimental for Israel's ability and the JNF's ability to attract your children to become active in Jewish life. It's detrimental in any aspect of this issue. So we asked ourselves, what is it that the world is willing to accept about us that we have, not something that we don't have, something that we possess, and that the world can relate to and find it also authentic? And again, this is all based on research. We discovered that there's one thing in us, the Israeli people and the Jewish people, that the world can accept as authentic, reliable, unique, and attractive at the same time. And that is, as you saw here on the screen, the great degree of creativity and innovation that exists in Israel. If you're familiar with the book Startup Nation, and you're familiar with the enormous success, you should know one thing about this book. It's the first book that made it to the bestsellers list that does not deal with the conflict. And the reason this book became so powerful as a conversation changer is because it was relevant to people. People were attracted to the story of the small people out there in a hostile territory in the Middle East that was able to produce such a thriving high-tech industry, biotech industry, electronics, what have you. And people, when they identify something that is relevant to their lives, they're willing to listen. And nobody, no place, no individual, no organization wishes to be defined only by his or her problems. Imagine what would have happened if I stood here in front of you and the first thing I would have told you about myself is that I'm in therapy for the last 20 years and it's not working. Why would you be interested in the best I could expect from you is sympathy. But would you do business with me? Would you give me your money? Absolutely not. You know, I always equate this to a first date situation. What does a normal person do on a first date? Same thing with countries. What does a normal person do on a first date? A normal person tries to put his or her best foot forward, trying to impress the other side, trying to win a second date, third date, and possibly have a relationship. But Israel begins the date with the American consumer in a very awkward way. We said, listen, you have to know this about me. I'm engaged in this terrible dispute with my neighbor. And before we make any progress here, you have to express support in my position. Otherwise, it can't work. There's never going to be a second date. Now, we say you can't build a house from the roof. You first have to build a relationship with the consumer. You first have to charm them. You first have to show them how Israel is relevant to their lives. Then, once you win the second date, the third, and the fourth, and you build a relationship, then you bring up your issues. You can't start the conversation with Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran and then expect people to come to Israel and visit. You just can't. You just convince them that Israel is under an existential threat. Why would they come to visit? And the numbers, as much as we are proud of the fact that last year we had a record-breaking year, 4 million tourists, I want you to know that our neighboring island of Cyprus is getting 11 million tourists a year. Not to mention Las Vegas, that's getting 44 million tourists a year. But we've got the goods. We've got the goods in such a big way. 84% of the kids that go on birthright come back and say, this was a life-changing event. Show me another place in the world where a 10-day visit changes people's lives. I've been to many places in the world. I never came back home to my wife and I said, I'm a different man. That's what happens to people when they go to Israel for the first time. That's that powerful of the place. And we must not sell this great place short with legal and historical argumentation all the time. There's a place for that, but Israel should not be defined solely by its problems. Each and every person in this room has a tremendous family to tell, of the story of a tremendous story to tell of the story of his family, of himself. Like my family came to Jerusalem in 1872 from Bukhara. My mother's family came from Yemen. And from destruction to resurrection, our story is amazing. Think about it. What the state of Israel was able to achieve in 64 years. Mind-boggling. A miracle. Nothing short of a miracle. And if after all of that, the only thing that people will know about us is that we're engaged in a conflict with our neighbors, then we all failed. If this is the only thing people will know about us, then we all failed. And this is why the JNF is so important to this conversation. Say, the current conversation is so limited. This is the conversation that you see on television. This is a conversation you read in the LA Times. It's all around Israel's problems. And I say to you, Israel is way more than its problems. No place is perfect, including Israel. No place is perfect. I remember when I presented my candidacy to serve here in Los Angeles, this was in early 1994, and I don't have to tell you what happened. You had a few bad years here. I was the only candidate, right? The combination of the Rodney King affair, the riots, the fires, the mudslides, the earthquake, and the O.J. Simpson, the whole thing together turned people off. People, imagine, in Israel, nobody wanted to serve in LA. It's a true story. Now, I was the only one who presented my candidacy because I have family here, and I knew that, LA is LA. With all the problems, I knew Los Angeles. But people that didn't know Los Angeles didn't want to come here. Same thing is happening to Israel. Now, no place is perfect, including Israel, but no place should only be judged by its imperfections. Israel should be judged by the way it's trying to fix them. Now, JNF is so important because JNF is helping us as a strategic partner in our never-ending, monumental effort to broaden the conversation about Israel. Now, the broader conversation about Israel has to be about areas that are relevant to people. We identified through research 6 areas, if you may, 6 lenses through which Israel has to be communicated to the world, in addition to the existing lens of the conflict, obviously. The first is the environment. You just saw on the screen the big things JNF is doing in Israel. I don't know how many of you know that Israel is a world leader in desert agriculture. Israel is a world leader in renewable energy.